the latest on Christian McCaffrey. The results of his MRI aren't in yet. Well, they're in, but they haven't told us, which is strange. Usually that gets reported, but Matt Mayoko, who's incredibly plugged in, tweeted this morning that from what he understands, it's a pain tolerance issue, and he left it at that. So it sounds like whatever it is, whether it's a cracked rib or a strained oblique or whatever, he's not going to make it worse by playing, but it could be extremely painful. Do you think he should play against the Vikings?
I would say no. Even if it's just a pain thing, it means there's something wrong in there. And I think if he gets hit really hard on that side, it could make it wronger. And I can tell you defensive players are going to go for him. They're not going to say, gee, we don't want to hurt Christian. They're going to go for it. I think a couple of things. The Niners are good enough to beat the Vikings without Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah.
And I think Shanahan is a good enough play caller to beat the Vikings without Christian McCaffrey. And if he can't do it, then we have to talk about next week. We have to talk about Shanahan some more. In other words, everything's dependent on this. Usually it's dependent on the quarterback. You're telling me everything's dependent on a running back? I'm not used to that, Iggy. I'm used to next man up. Mason is a good running back.
He's averaging 5.9 yards per carry for his career. But you got to remember, despite all this talent on offense and Kyle Shanahan's overwhelming genius, this offense was scoring 19 points per game last year before McCaffrey came here. And we talked earlier about how he forces teams to play zone coverage and he kind of simplifies what the Niners face. Is Deebo Samuel number one wide receiver? I don't know. Is Ayuk a number one wide receiver? I don't know. Kittle had 1 yard last. It's all about McCaffrey. Everyone else is sort of secondary to him. And once he's off the field, who takes over?
Shanahan. Shanahan
takes over.
Shanahan. Sure. I'm telling you, if Bill Walsh lost a key player, let's say he lost Jerry Rice for a game, okay? He could win. He didn't go in his office and say, oh God, Jerry's out. What am I going to do? Oh my God. I used to see him. He had these yellow legal pads, and he was neat little handwriting and making circles and triangles, not X's and O's, triangles and O's. He didn't say, oh, Jerry. He'd say, I'm going to use this guy. I'm going to use this guy, Brent Jones, blah, 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 blah. We're going to win. That's how he would feel. And Shanahan has to be that courageous and that resilient and that clever. It's about Shanahan.
Yeah, I mean, the first year that Bill Walsh won the Super Bowl, 1981, he didn't have Jerry Rice. He didn't have Roger Craig. He had Dwight Clark and Freddie Solomon. And I wasn't even alive back then, so I couldn't tell you anyone else. But I mean, it was like he didn't have a bunch of Hall of Famers. No,
he didn't have any. Right, I think he had Hofer and I think Linville Elliott. He had Hofer.
Okay,
Hofer was a good guy.
Okay,
but not Hall of Fame.
Work. No,
absolutely. Bill was the kind of guy. He would sit down and say, "Gee," he wouldn't say, "Gee, I have a system. How can I plug inferior players in my system?" I saw him. He would sit down and say, I'm missing these guys for this game. What can I do with these guys? So the guys came before the system. He would adapt to whom he had. I don't see Kyle doing that. And if he doesn't have McCaffrey, the key player is Kyle. How do you get a good offense? And talking to his defensive coordinator if things aren't going well and say, could you try something different?
I think it would be good for the Niners to not have McCaffrey out there for a little bit because they've been using him like a crutch. It's great that he's good. You use him, to your heart's content in the playoffs, no restrictions, but not now. He's got an injury issue, an injury that's painful, and let it heal up. He should sit against the Vikings. He should sit against the Bengals next week. The following week's a bye week. You could give him 3 straight off weeks and then have him ready to go fresh for the stretch run. That's what I would do. But
that's what I would do.
Know.
Iggy, didn't you get the feeling, and again, I don't cover Stanford football, but that he didn't play in that bowl game, one of the reasons is that David Shaw really overused him?
Oh, my God. You should go back and look at some of the game logs from Christian McCaffrey. It's before players were getting paid in college. It was like an amateur carrying the ball 30, 35 times a game. Like, dude, that is unfair to ask of your amateur kid athlete.
Yeah.
David. Yeah.
And what you have with McCaffrey is you have an overwhelming talent. Iggy, it's so much fun to watch him play, but he's not that big. He's not
No.
that big, and he's been hurt before. You have to use him carefully and with love. You have to use him with love, not just pound him out there. You really have to bring in other backs more of the time. And what Kyle says is, well, he doesn't want to come out. Hello, you're the coach. He's not the coach. If he doesn't want to come out, you say, with all due respect, I want you to come out.
Because look at him now.
Yeah.
Look what happened by acquiescing to Christian's wishes. And what's interesting is what's going to happen this week. If, knowing Christian, he's going to want to play because he knows the perception of him from people that don't think he's as good as he thinks he is that he's soft. He's finesse. He's not a real bell cow running back. So that's why he doesn't want to come off the field. He wants to prove it. Nah, I don't care how I look. I can do this. I'm as tough as anyone. So he's going to want to play through this. Like, save him from himself, Kyle, please.
Save him from himself. I want to say a very sad sight on the sideline last week we were watching on television was him rotating his back, trying to somehow work out the pain. It bothered me. It was sad. I was thinking, just take a breath, give it up for today. It's not your day.
It's a long season. Yeah. Another guy who was gutting it out in that game that I don't think should play in the next game, Trent Williams. To me, he looked clearly injured. He wasn't playing well at all. I mean, I guess he was doing the Niners a favor and a service by sticking it out there, but sit him unless he's 100%.
So what we're saying is that Williams and McCaffrey are wonderful competitors. We're not criticizing them at all. They really want to play. This is where the coach comes in, and he has to be the father figure and say, you know what? Not today.
Not today. Yeah. The father, I like that. Who is Sparta? Jay Sway says, I feel like our offensive struggles had more to do with Brown's defense than the offense being bad. Does not bode well versus the Eagles.
Well, it's the Browns defense that made the offense look bad, and an offense that's guided by Kyle Shanahan is not supposed to look bad under any circumstances.
True. Jimmy Kwan says Kyle's playbook needs to include scripted plays for Ray, Juszczyk, Dwelly, Bell for games like the Browns. Too much CMC too early. Kyle is the leader, and players feed off of him. Love the Con Zone.
Oh, thank you.
Love you, Jimmy Kwan. Good stuff. I agree with that. Ernesto says, to be honest, that game had too many. If they make that play or get that call, we win that game. Jake's kick was just the last one, and yes, all need to be made. I'm with you on that one, Ernesto. I know what you mean. A lot of those. They didn't play well enough to win. They're better than the Browns, but they didn't play well enough to win.